If the power goes out, pray it's due to the weather. By Kills Witch 30.
Hello, Reddit. My name is Brent Jenkins. I'm from the northern part of central Michigan in the lower peninsula, and currently we are in a winter storm watch. High winds up to 40 miles per hour, with heavy snowfall and freezing rain. I knew a storm was due, as we've had one of the mildest winters I can remember. So when our power flickered before going out entirely, I wasn't too concerned. I got 3 kerosene heaters out and prepared to wait out the storm. After last night, I'm positive the power going out wasn't due to the storm. Let me explain. I woke up around 3:30 in the morning to heavy rain slamming into the side of my home. The winds howled as the storm made itself known. I hoped the power would stay on, but since I am surrounded by trees, I knew it would go out. I'd spend the next day cutting down trees and removing tree limbs from my yard. This is nothing new, though. It's one of the prices you pay for living out in the country. And for living in Michigan. Not long after I woke up, the power began to flicker as I expected. Damn it, I muttered, tossing the blankets off. I got up and walked to my closet, digging through useless junk to find the kerosene heater. Once I found it, I dragged it out and set it up in the center of my bedroom. The container which held the kerosene gas was out in the shed, and I cursed myself under my breath for not bringing it in before bed. I threw my boots on and opened the front door. Instantly, the winds yanked the screen door out of my hand, slamming it into the porch railing. I fought the wind as I stepped out and closed it after some effort. I was a little stunned at just how strong the winds were, making the freezing rain sting as it pelted my face. I ran as quickly as I could to the shed, shielding my face the whole time. As soon as I opened the door and stepped inside, the wind and rain outside completely stopped. Only a soft drizzle remained. What the hell? I asked myself as I opened the shed door back to look outside. It was ominously quiet, as if all sounds seemingly stopped together. Even the light drizzle came to a halt. The air hung heavy with an odd static feel to the air. My ears slightly rang as this new calm to the air was deafening. I couldn't quite figure out why, but I was completely terrified. Everything about being out there alone made me feel incredibly exposed. After a few seconds of scanning my yard, I heard something. A tapping. My head spun around to the back side of my house, and I caught movement. It was gone as quickly as I saw it. Something disappeared behind the back wall. My heart slammed into my chest, and a lump formed in my throat. Judging by what little I saw, it looked like a man, if he were 7 feet tall with lanky arms. I made the decision to make a mad dash for the front door before it came back around. After what felt like an eternity, I made it to the door and ran inside, quickly but quietly shutting and locking it behind me. I ran to my bedroom, and like a scared little boy of 10, I dove under the covers. I lay there panting for a few minutes, catching my breath, before mustering the courage to peek out from under the blankets. My room was clear, but movement to my left by the window caused my heart to race again. My eyes slowly looked toward the window, seeing the shape of a dark head peeking in through the glass. As I laid my eyes on it, the thing stopped tapping. Its mouth curled into a huge grin as our eyes met. It shouldn't have been able to see me. My head was under the blanket still as I was peeking my eyes out from a slit in them. It looked like a bald, normal man, other than it appeared to be hunched over, cupping his hands around his eyes. My window is about 6 feet off the ground, so in order for him to be hunched, he had to be extremely tall. His smile was also much wider than his mouth should have allowed without tearing his lips. I decided to lay perfectly still, hoping he thought I was asleep. Deep down, I know he knew I was awake. I didn't look away once. I'd fear he'd slink away and find his way inside. I had a rifle in my closet, but the bullets were locked in a container. I never thought I'd have to use my gun for protection, just hunting. I glanced towards my closet for a split second, and when I looked back to the window, he was gone. My heart started hammering even louder than it already was as I lost sight of him. Still, I didn't move a muscle. I laid still like that for hours, afraid to move. Only when the rain picked back up and the wind started to howl did I start to relax a little. This was when I noticed that heavy feeling in the air was gone as well. I slowly uncovered and got out of bed, tiptoeing through the house. Light started peeking in through the windows as well, hinting it was around 7:30 in the morning. I walked up to every window, peeking out for any signs of the man, whatever he was. Thankfully, I saw nothing. I was dead tired, so I walked over to the coffee maker and pressed brew. To my amazement, the power was back on. I hadn't even realized the heater kicking on throughout the night. I was too busy, nervously awaiting for that thing to break in and kill me. I flicked the TV on, and the morning news began to play. A local man attacked in his bedroom early this morning. He did not survive the injuries, the lady reported. After a few minutes of watching, a picture of the man attacked showed, and I dropped my coffee cup, shattering on impact with the hard wooden floor. It was a picture of my neighbor that lived a half-mile up the road. He was found dead in his bed by his wife, who thankfully was sleeping in their kids' room due to them being afraid of the power being out. No one had heard him struggle or anything, just found him murdered. I was stunned. I knew right away that it had something to do with that creepy tall guy I saw at my window. If I hadn't seen him and run inside when I did, I'm sure I'd have shared the same fate as my neighbor's husband. As I sat listening to the news continue their story, a weather update caught my attention. Prepare for round 2 of the storm continuing through tonight. The storm's strength will increase, so people are advised to deal with more power outages. We will keep you updated as we track this storm, she finished. Goosebumps filled my entire body at the thought of that thing coming back. I don't know how I know, but I know it will come back with the storm. This time, however, I'm going to be prepared. I loaded my rifle, and it's sitting next to my nightstand. I have a feeling I'll be needing it tonight. Alone on a Winter Storm by Rasta Karma. A bit of backstory on me, as the event doesn't sound that scary, but for a shy kid like I was terrified. I've been quite lonely for quite some time while I was younger. I had a lot of trouble making new friends because of the anxiety, but I've always been told I was very mature for my age, which I guess was a good thing, but at the same time did explain the fact that I had few friends. Because of that, I developed quite the imagination. It would become my way of escaping the real world, and to this day, it helped me greatly control my anxiety and find a job in video games that I still love to this day. But it does sometimes come with a downside, as you'll soon learn. I live in Canada, a part that is famous for having harsh winters. You know the Canadian cliché. On a weekend mid-January, my parents had to leave town for the night and left me alone. Nothing unusual, since I was sometimes left on my own because I knew how to take care of myself, and my parents knew I would not do anything dangerous or stupid. Add to that the fact that we lived in a quiet neighborhood, which eased their minds for leaving an 11-year-old kid home alone. My sisters, being quite older than me, were already long gone from our home to live on their own. I'd say, as most kids that age, the simple idea of being alone was exhilarating. I could finally play video games until my eyes hurt, without having anyone to shut the console down and force me to do my homework. For anyone living in the sun, it is truly the best feeling to play games inside when there is a snowstorm outside. That being said, I'll stick to the scary part. I think enough background was given to understand my state of mind, so pardon me, I'll brutally skip to that fateful night. So it was starting to get quite late for a preteen. The clock was about to start a new day, and the only light inside was that of the old CRT TV screening my game of GoldenEye in the basement. Funny thing, I can't remember what I ate for breakfast that morning, but I could tell you every little detail of that night. It seems that the brain tends to protect the information better when something big breaks the routine. The clock hit midnight, and we had those old clocks you often find in those creepy horror movies, where it's always stored in the grandparents' house. It would sound the clock 12 times in a very loud and heavy tone, where metal seems to resonate in an infinite echo. At this exact moment, like somehow it knew it would add to the creepiness, a loud knock could be heard from the front door. I guess I must have been hypnotized by my game, as the heavy sound kind of woke me up. It was still the day when I was playing the game, and having lost count of time, I was surprised to see it dark outside. I told me it was quite weird to have someone knock so late, and in the middle of winter, during a snowstorm. My parents were quite close to the front neighbors, and since the conditions outside were very bad, maybe the electricity was cut for them, and maybe they came to ask if they could stay the night. Yeah, you know, kids don't think so clearly about these things. I quickly looked through the windows on the side of the door, but I saw nothing. All I could see was the same white void while looking through the peephole. I decided it was nothing, so I went back to my game so I could finish the mission and call it off for a night. I hadn't even gotten to my controller when I heard another loud bang on the door, but this time it kept knocking until I managed to get on the level of the house. As soon as I could reach for the last steps, it went silent once again. At that point, I started to have a very bad, eerie feeling. It's unnatural to have such a loud bang to disappear, and then the next second hearing nothing else. It's like the snowstorm had stopped instantly without warning. Add to that fact that I would have heard footsteps in the snow because of how quiet it was. I decided that I had had enough, and I would go to sleep straightway without having any of the morning lights arrive faster. I was about to go back down when I started hearing knocks on the basement windows. I totally lost it. The sound seemed to be coming from each side of the house, but how could that be? I grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I could find, and decided to hide in the dark corner of the house to peek outside and try to see what was causing the sound. Again, as fast as it came, the knocking stopped, and it was dead silent. I waited 5 minutes, 15 minutes, what seemed to be hours as I panicked inside. I finally decided that whatever was there, it must be gone now, so I could gather what courage I had left and go to close my game as fast as I could. Since there was a window directly in the room where my TV was in the basement, I looked outside to try to see something, and that is when it struck me. There was no trace in the snow, like nobody was there 3 minutes ago. I knew the snowstorm was not powerful enough to hide the footsteps, so I started to imagine the worst. It didn't help that I believed in ghosts for a long time, especially that time, as I have seen my fair share of inexplicable things. I finally closed the game console and the TV and decided to go straight to my bed located on the second floor of the house. We live in what we call a Canadian house, if it helps give an idea. As soon as everything was closed, the snowstorm seemed to come back from nowhere, and then the wind got as powerful as I had ever seen. The noise was getting crazy. You could hear the trees outside creaking and cracking, and at that exact moment, I could hear it again. Loud knocks on the front door, but this time it was coupled with the knocks on the windows. I literally froze from fear for a few minutes, but I realized I had to do something or my heart would literally jump out of my chest, which is not a really good feeling. I took the closest blanket I could and ran headfirst into our cold room storage, where there were no windows and where I could lock the door. I could not say how long I was in there, as time warps when you face that kind of situation. All I knew was if I stayed there for a while, knife in hand, eyes wide open, my brain was going in the worst places imaginable. I finally got out. It was still dark outside, but I was too tired at this point, and I wanted the comfort of my bed more than anything in the world. Well, except maybe to see my parents or the light of day. There was no knocking anymore, and the snowstorm seemed to be back to normal. I decided before I tried to go to sleep it off to take one last peek outside, and what I saw, I still ask myself about today, or about what did it. I kid you not, but there were at least 10 snowmen outside on our yard, looking at the front door. No need to say I sprinted to my room as fast as I could, and never looked back. Frostbite by Opinionated IMO. The temperature outside dropped drastically in just a few hours. It went from chilly to a frigid depth which no human could ever survive for more than a few minutes. As the mercury plummeted, there wasn't really anything else to do but stay inside and wait it out. Realistically, that's the only smart thing to do during any severe weather in the land of 1,000 lakes. I realized that but certain events occurred during that ordeal which forced me to abandon the relative safety of my home. This is my sobering story. An enveloping cloak of darkness fell over the horizon at daybreak. Then my windows glazed over with ice. It was perhaps an opaque mask to prevent me from witnessing that horror that was to come. The ferocious tempest made the walls and roof of my house creak and groan. It was as if I was submerged in the deep blue sea, and the ocean pressure was trying to crush me like a tin can. I stoked the fire in earnest and fed it cords of wood to keep it going. I felt sorry for my horses and livestock taking shelter in the barn. I prayed it would offer them enough protection from the deadly elements cursing our little burg. The window continued to rattle and shudder in protest, while icy winds whipped back and forth. Occasionally, a sword-like draft would force itself under the door and violently sting my face. I had enough firewood and supplies to last at least a week if I was frugal. For that reason, I wasn't greatly concerned about the ravages of this fierce storm at first. I'd been through blizzards and severe winter gales before, many of which were just as powerful as this one, but something about it felt decidedly different. The inhuman howl of the wind began to resemble a feral shriek or a mongrel snarl to my curious ears. On top of that, I could hear my animals really squeal and bray from their isolated barn stalls. They were suffering from the uncaring nip of frostbite. Their frightened cries continued on through the night, unabated. I eventually realized that they were being inspired to protest the numbing cold by more than just an alarming fear of freezing to death. There was a genuine tone of terror in their bleating lamentations. Then I heard a distinctive scratching sound against the walls and rooftop of my farmhouse. It was all around me. I was certain it wasn't just random storm noises playing tricks on me. It was absolutely deliberate and had an organic origin. My imagination ran wild. I started to suspect that there was some sort of diabolical force behind the relentless barrage of blows and scrapes levied against my old house and the outbuildings. From a rare unglazed vantage point in a window, I received the answer to my mystery. It wasn't something I was prepared for. Frankly, I don't think anyone could have really been prepared for it. I witnessed the frightening source of the eerie scraping noises and feral shrieks which haunted my senses. A half-dozen or so very large crystalline skeletal creatures were milling about and frolicking around my frozen property. It was just like they owned the place. For a lack of a more suitable term, I could only describe these unholy beings as supernatural frost demons. They seemed to actually thrive outside in the deadly cold. Our frigid Minnesota hell was apparently a glorious heaven to them. I ducked down out of view before one of the blue-eyed devils saw me. They obviously travel on the frigid winds of winter storms and rule the icy northern range until spring thaw chases them away. I heard my poor animals cry out as they were being slaughtered and savaged by these inhuman creatures made of equal parts ice and evil. One by one, they killed and consumed all of my cattle and horses, while I cowered like a child sequestered inside the home. Would the whole of my livestock sate their bloodthirsty appetites? I didn't want to find out if they were coming for me next, nor did I relish the thought of trying to escape from them out in the sub-zero temperatures. Finally, I had no choice. A gust of feral air blew straight down the chimney and extinguished my fire. Every time I tried to revive it, they blew it out from high above the flue. I suppose they were on my roof? The temperature in the house began to drop rapidly. Although my door and windows were barricaded, I suspected they planned to wait out the siege until I froze to death. I burned through nearly a week's worth of matches trying to relight the dwindling coals. It was hopeless. I gathered my shotgun, 2 boxes of shells, and a heavy winter suit. Even with specialized clothing and boots, it was incredibly dangerous to venture out into blizzard conditions like those, but I couldn't stay inside anymore. The remaining heat was rapidly fading away. I also grabbed a small handheld propane torch and the last of my matches. I hoped it was enough to give me a fighting chance against these blizzard beasts. Then I had decided where to go in the frozen farmland. They were surely waiting to ambush me if I tried to flee out the front door, so I had to create a substantial distraction. I made 3 Molotov cocktails and planned to toss 1 or 2 of them into the barn. The ensuing fire and explosion would hopefully buy me a little time to escape. Then, I needed to run as quickly as possible through knee-deep snow powder to a safe place. I had a tiny storm shelter buried in the hillside, which has a small cache of supplies. I hoped they wouldn't find me there, but with my telltale footprints in the snow, it seemed inevitable. As soon as I opened the door, they sprang into action, but I was ready for them. I lit one of the Molotovs and tossed it into the barn. It flamed up immediately, but didn't explode right away as I'd hoped. Instead, the fire spread and ignited the aged wood. Since they were waiting on me to exit the house, the fire didn't distract them. I lit the wick of the second cocktail and hit one of them with it. I will never forget the unholy scream it expelled as the fire melted its icy bones. Luckily, the rogue flames caught another one of them, and it also burned it to cinders. That really caught their attention. I backed away slowly as they came moving in. They were careful to stay out of throwing range, but I could feel the hate-filled fury in their cold blue eyes. All of the remaining frost demons crept towards me in intimidating menace. I kept backing away while watching them over my left shoulder. Some of them split off from the pursuing mob with an apparent intention to surround me from the other side. They knew it was a strategic mistake for all of them to be gathered closely together in one place. I only had 1 Molotov cocktail left and would scarcely have enough time to light the fuse before they were upon me. Even if I took down 3 or 4 stalking me directly from the front, it would impact those who split off from the pack. The propane torch in my pocket was a last resort weapon. I had little chance of lighting. I saw the fierceness in their inhuman eyes. They snarled at me like rabid dogs waiting to taste my flesh. I held the match tightly in one hand and the cocktail in the other. If they charged me, I might not even have time to strike it. The deadly frostbite was burning my exposed face, and the heavy suit and deep snow reduced my progress to near crawl. I'd lost sight of the others, and presumed they'd circled around to accomplish their ambush. At the very first sign of them within striking distance, I was going to light the final wick and torch as many of them as possible. Then I'd have less baggage and would run for my life. My chances of surviving were slim, but I intended to take out as many of them as possible in a final blaze of glory. As if on cue, the others broke formation from the pack and appeared behind me. I made a split decision to light the final weapon and toss it at them. The ensuing fireball caught 3 of them by surprise, and they paid dearly for it. It was a necessary and effective tactic, but it left me virtually defenseless. Those who remained after the desperate attack were greatly incensed by my actions and encouraged by my apparent lack of defense. I clutched the small propane canister in a half-hearted bluff and continued walking away. I kept them back slightly, but I could tell they were skeptical if I could actually harm them. In the last skirmish, I'd missed my only opportunity to run to the storm shelter, but it was a moot point. There was no hiding from them anymore, and I couldn't survive much longer in the frigid cold. I was miles away from civilization and would never make it to the town. Just as I was coming to terms with my imminent demise, the town came to me. A county salt truck was treating the roads and apparently saw my barn ablaze. They came to see if a rescue from the fire was needed. I flagged them down and scrambled into the cab in record-setting time. The frost demons must have sensed the tons of road salt in the back of the truck, and recoiled in horror. They didn't want any of it to splatter on them. I tell you, I've never been more happy to encounter the road department than at that moment in my life. In a few days, the blizzard finally subsided and far less apocalyptic weather came along. That might have brought a sense of relief to some people, but I wasn't about to take any more chances. I enlisted a real estate agent to sell my farm and tainted property. I rented a large box truck and drove all the way down to sunny Florida. They may have their share of natural disasters, but it's doubtful I would ever risk getting frostbite again. I hope you enjoyed these scary winter horror stories, friends. Scary winter storm stories at that. I hope in the frigid parts of the world that winter isn't too hostile to you, and if it is, I hope respite comes soon for you. Friends, it has been wonderful to have you in this video, and I encourage you to look for Volume 3 of Scary Winter Storm Stories. In the meantime, I thank you. I am your host, GM Danielson, and this is Horrorcraft.